Hello, glowworms. It's time to go antiquing. Today, we're shopping at the Weil Antique Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and we're going to see what kind of glowy goodies we can find and possibly add to the uranium glass collection. If you've been looking for a fun way to spend an afternoon in Allentown, the Weil Antique Center is a great place. This warehouse currently houses over 100 different vendors with many different eclectic wares for sale. From antique furniture to rare glassware, this location has everything a vintage collector could hope to find. You'll definitely want to dedicate a few hours to exploring this spot if you want a good look at everything. Don't forget to check out the vendor sale signs, as they often offer many different discounts and sales throughout the year. And of course, don't forget to bring your blacklight. Who knows, you might just find the perfect piece to add to your fluorescent glass collection. Today, I'm on the hunt for a piece of Vaseline glass to add to my collection. For this, I've got my trusty blacklight and my Geiger counter ready, so let's go visit some of my favorite vendors to see what they have for us. There are a few different vendors here who tend to have uranium glass for sale, but of course, you can always get lucky finding it scattered amongst the other booths as well. As I was coming into the shop this morning, I saw a lot of different vendors bringing in new items, and I'm excited to see what treasures we might have the first chance at finding. So first, I'm going to take you to one of my favorite booths. This vendor offers an astonishing mix of vintage and antique clocks. From grandfather clocks to cuckoo clocks, there are so many clocks to look at. But of course, my favorites are the mantle clocks with custard faces. This location always has a great selection of these mantle clocks to shop through or to just admire if they're out of your price range like they are for me. I'm actually pretty surprised how many there are for sale right now. So let's take a walk through and appreciate some of these custard glass clocks and their amazing ornate details. I personally only have 2 small mantle clocks and 1 medium-sized mantle clock in my collection because they tend to be several $100s when I find them in the antique stores by me. If you happen to get lucky enough to find one of these at a reasonable price, I would highly recommend adding one to your collection. They're absolutely stunning and they make wonderful conversation pieces. Like I said before, I really can't believe how many there are for sale right now. Usually there's a couple here, but this is quite the selection, and I honestly think it would be pretty hard for me to pick a favorite. There are even more hiding over here for us to look at in this curio cabinet, and I wonder if you can predict which ones are going to glow. Even though I have found dozens of these clocks already, sometimes I still get tricked or surprised from time to time. There's still so much that I need to learn about these clocks, so if you know any fun facts, feel free to leave them in the comments. It's honestly pretty funny how much my taste in vintage items has changed since I started collecting uranium glass. Once upon a time, I probably would have thought that these clocks were a little bit tacky, but I really just love them so much now, and I wonder if that's the same for anyone else. For instance, I still find myself appreciating these 2 clocks up top that don't have any custard glass or glow to them. I still think that their housing and their details are absolutely beautiful. So if you're a lover of clocks or uranium glass, I definitely suggest stopping by this booth if you have the chance. But for now, it's time to keep moving on to see what other radioactive antiques we can find. I do know another vendor tucked away among these glass cases who tends to have a little bit of Vaseline glass. So let's take a look and see what kind of selection they have today. I already see some beautiful things along the top shelf, and this vendor does have a 20% off sale for anything that is $15 or more. These antique early American pressed glass pieces were likely made sometime in the late 1800s. The pattern is called 3-panel and they have a fabulous glow. There are a few other antique pieces available up top with a few different patterns. Let's check them out and see how well they glow. Right now, I'm using a 365 nanometer blacklight to light up the glassware. More specifically, this flashlight is the Arcfeld Pro made by Olight. This light has quickly become one of my favorites in addition to the Convoy S2 Plus. If you have any interest in purchasing a good quality 365 nanometer blacklight, you can check out the links in my bio. I have to admit that I am pretty tempted by this cactus pattern vase because I have a few other pieces with the same pattern in my collection, but it is a bit out of my budget even with the 20% off sale. Around the corner, I did find another little section of uranium glass. This vendor has a blacklight display so you can see how well things glow. I think my favorite item on this shelf is definitely the little hand-painted uranium glass lampshade. I really wish that I had something to put it on, then maybe I could justify the purchase, but hopefully someone else can use it. My second favorite item is this lidded candy dish made out of custard glass. This dish has a really nice glow to it, and I think that the price is reasonable at $75, especially for its size. Again, I'm tempted to grab it, but I don't have much room left in my showcases, so I need to be selective. Let's continue on with our search and see what we can find. A little bit further down, I found a Big Ben clock made by West Clocks. If you're familiar with the story of the Radium girls, then you're probably familiar with these clocks. And you might be aware that depending on the year that they were made, they may have radioactive radium dials. Thankfully, I did bring my Geiger counter on this trip so we can test it to see if this clock has radium paint. Right now we are using a digital GMC 500 Plus, and as soon as we put the Geiger counter up to the clock, you can see that the reading starts to spike. Then once it's properly adjusted, the counts per minute jump to well over 1200. So now we know for sure that this clock is spicy. Sometimes I do pick up these clocks for my personal collection or to resell on my Etsy page, but today I think I'll leave this one for another collector to find. Let me know in the comments if you also collect radium dial clocks, and if so, how many do you have in your collection right now? As I was looking through these curio cabinets, I did notice this pair of red Viking glass fairy lamps that had a slight glow. Then, as I looked off to my left, I noticed this adorable miniature Burmese glass basket that also had a fabulous glow. And before I could move on to look for more glowy things, I could hear that something was coming our way. You see, the Weil Antique Center is positioned exceptionally close to an active set of railroad tracks. And every once in a while you're shopping here, you might be lucky enough to hear or see a train go by. So let me take a moment to give you the full experience. But headphone users, you might want to beware. All right, after a moment of train appreciation, we are back to our antiquing. And we just found a booth with a ton of depression wear for sale. There's a bunch of pink and green, and I'm hoping that a lot of it is going to glow. And again, we are using a 365 nanometer light, so we might get a bit of a manganese glow from some of these pieces, but a lot of these are looking like they are uranium glass. The more that you collect uranium glass, the more that you'll start to become familiar with the different glass patterns that are more likely to glow. Some patterns can be more tricky than others, but I find that the cherry blossom pattern is pretty reliable when it comes to having a uranium glass glow. But no matter what your experience level is, I highly recommend that you inspect before you collect. And this is also true when dealing with vintage Fiestaware items. The more that you collect vintage Fiestaware, the more that you become familiar with the tone of orange that you're looking for when looking for the radioactive red Fiestaware. But even so, I still like to check things with my Geiger counter before I buy any vintage Fiestaware or radioactive red pottery. So let's test out these pieces and see if they are truly radioactive. Radioactive red pottery tends to be extra spicy, so this piece started interacting with my Geiger counter before I even touched it. And I'm pretty sure that this orange piece in this divided tray is also going to be radioactive. I'm giving my Geiger counter just a second to calm down before I try it. And there's also a chance that the ivory piece could also be slightly radioactive, but that's a little difficult to test between all these radioactive red pieces. Now the last piece to test on this shelf is this Fiestaware teapot. And again, immediately we can see that this piece is spicy. The vendor is asking over $50 for each of these pieces, so I think I'm going to be leaving them behind for someone else to find. But off to the left, there are actually a few more pieces to check out and test with the Geiger counter, including this singular radioactive red shaker. And this piece is also spicy. And again, the ivory pieces of Fiestaware can also be radioactive from time to time, but I honestly don't want to take the time to test all of them. So instead, I'm going to check the last radioactive red piece to see if it is really spicy. And it turns out that the last piece is also radioactive. This is honestly a really cute little piece of Fiestaware, and for the price of $15, I think that it'll be a nice piece for someone to add to their collection. I'm definitely going to leave this one behind for a newbie to find. So let's carry on and see what else this vendor has to offer. There is a lot of pink depression ware for sale, and off to the left in the showcase, there is a tea-berry gum stand for sale. I've been hoping to add one of these to my collection, but I'm holding out to see if I can find one for less than $100. This vendor is asking $175 on this stand, so I will be leaving it behind, but these are a lot of fun to run into. And if we look to the right here, I did notice that there is also a vintage bridge lamp for sale. Sometimes you can find these with uranium glass parts, but unfortunately that one was not a glower. Then down here on the bottom shelf, there are also a couple of juice reamers. This big glowy one was $200 and the jadeite juice reamer was $45. I really liked the jadeite reamer, but I do already have a bunch of juice reamers in my collection, so I'm going to hold out for something different instead. And at the next booth over, I already spy another vintage bridge lamp. And from the aisle, I could clearly see that it has at least one piece of uranium glass. But unfortunately, there are no other spacers and there is not a uranium glass base. The one piece of uranium glass does have a lovely glow, but for the price of $125, I did leave it behind for someone else to find. If it had a few more pieces of uranium glass, I definitely would have brought it home, but I think it's going to make a lovely project lamp for a new collector. Then, in addition to the floor lamp, I did spy another piece of radioactive red pottery. But one of my favorite things that this vendor tends to have here is acro agate flower pots. There is actually a smaller section than usual of acro agate to look through today, and some have a little bit of a glow to them, including this tiny blue flower pot with a uranium glow to it. I love finding these out in the wild, but I do already have a few of these in my collection, so unless they are extremely cheap or extremely cool, I tend to leave them behind. And as you know, today I'm on the hunt for something a little bit more unique that I don't already have in my collection. So let's keep looking and see what else we can find. One of the things that I find most frequently at the antique store that is radioactive are actually uranium glazed pottery pieces. For instance, many of the jewel tea or autumn leaf pieces from Hall pottery tend to glow under 365 nanometer light, but not all of them do, which I think makes the hunt even more fun. To me, looking for uranium glass at the antique store is often like having my own secret treasure hunt. You definitely have to look high and low because you never know when a piece might be tucked in a shelf somewhere. In fact, I almost walked right by this custard glass fairy lamp. I definitely was tempted to bring this piece home because it had such a nice glow. The vendor was asking $89, which I think is a pretty fair price as far as my area goes. But again, this is another piece that I am going to have to leave behind for someone else to find. Then, as I was heading back to the front of the store, I noticed this clock that could possibly be radioactive. So let's take out the Geiger counter and give it a check. And it turns out that this little table clock is radioactive. The parts of this vintage set were being sold separately, and the price for the vintage table clock was only $20. If this clock was a bit more industrial, I definitely would have snagged it at that price. But since it's not quite my style, again, I'm going to leave it behind for another collector to find. Another thing that I was excited to find on my way out was this vintage coffee set. I do have a soft spot for these as they are often made with beautiful uranium glaze and floral patterns. I actually have a very similar set at home on my kitchen counter, and while I don't personally use it, I do think that it is an absolutely adorable decoration. So we ended up finding a lot of different radioactive antiques today, but I did not add anything to my personal collection, which means that I'll just have to come back another time to see what I can find. Thank you so much for coming along on this antiquing adventure, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Good luck and happy hunting!